My name is John Plonka. I was born in Chicago, 1946. Lower middle class kind of family. Was fortunate enough to go to some excellent public schools. Got out early out of high school. Couldn't find a job because I looked like I was 12 and I wasn't old enough. I wasn't 18 years old. So I went to junior college. Long about the time, I guess it was 2.5 years after that, Uncle Sam got me. I got drafted. During that time, they had a provision that you couldn't prolong your education to avoid the draft. I wasn't doing that, but at 17 or 18, I didn't take college very seriously, and I was still doing freshman courses and early sophomore, starting my 3rd year, which qualified me to be drafted. I was drafted in Chicago, went through their physical. After that point, we were taken in a room and a Marine walked in and started counting people off. And I was one of the people he counted, and I was in the Marine Corps. So I went from having no real responsibility whatsoever to being in the Marine Corps in about a 12-hour period. I was sent out to the West Coast. I did my boot camp and specialized training at the depot and then at Pendleton. I left there and was sent to a school to learn how to type. At the end of that typing class, I was able to get my name down correctly and about a half a sentence when the test ended. So I was told that I would be transferred to a military unit, and I was getting shipped out to Vietnam. While I was waiting for my orders to come through, a colonel came in and said, "Is there anybody in the room that can read blueprints?" And I raised my hand because while one of my many jobs was working construction, and specifically what I did was take the blueprints for the building and bring the right equipment into each room so that they could just keep moving right along. And basically that's what I did during the summertime when there was no school. He put me at a desk, and it had at the time it was an LTD, and he said, "We have to put all of these little cardboard squares into that LTD. You've got an hour and a half." And he came back and he looked at it and he says, "Well, I guess you're working for me now." I was transferred to El Toro Air Station, where I worked with 4 other people loading ships. And that's what my basic job was just loading ships. I would lay out the blueprint for it, and then we'd carry it out to the dock. And at the time, they were using civilian stevedores, and I was the military representative to actually inspect the loading of the ship, make sure everything's tied down. I did that almost a year and a half, and at that time, they were slowing down shipments into Vietnam, so I had a lot of time on my hands, and they made me a barrack sergeant. Since there wasn't anybody to compete with for a promotion, as a promotion came up, they would just drop it on my desk and walk away. So I was a sergeant at the time. It only took about 14, 15 months to become a sergeant. And I became a part-time person loading ships, and the rest of the time I spent being a barrack sergeant for what they referred to as short-timers. A short-timer was a person who came back from Vietnam. He had 90 days or less left in his service, and they didn't have a job for those guys. They had nothing for them. They were put in the barracks. They were awakened at 6 o'clock in the morning. They stayed in the bed most of the day. They could go out in the evening, and then they would come right back and start all over again. When I became the barrack sergeant, it just didn't seem reasonable to me. I knew it was, the fact of the matter is those guys were very different from the normal human beings. Some of them couldn't even walk down the street without getting in a fight. So we changed the rules in that particular barracks, and we said, you know, you could hang a note on the end of your bed, and if it said you didn't want to get up until 10 o'clock, I wasn't going to bother you until 10 o'clock. If you wanted to go take a walk out on the base, you go right ahead and walk out on the base. You just had a certain amount of time to be back. Another one of the rule changes we had was there was an inspection. Every Thursday night, all Marines were in their barracks cleaning up, and a lieutenant would walk by and he'd say, okay, you guys are good, you can go on leave, or on a weekend pass. If you didn't pass, you didn't get to go anywhere. And that was the only real rule we had, is everybody had to be there Thursday night, and we had to pass. I think that's when it finally occurred to me what the Vietnam War was doing to soldiers. They weren't bad guys. They just lost track of what was real and what wasn't. They would see people getting shot every day, and so it became normal for them. And we would have quite a few fights in the barracks just because it was over something stupid. A guy dropped his soap and somebody didn't like the way it fell on the ground, and they'd start punching it out. And I think that's what scared me the most about being in Vietnam, about the Vietnam War, was the fact that we were bringing people home that had no control. And we just let them go on the street. And when their 90 days was up, they'd hand them a piece of paper. The other problem that they had is a lot of the guys who were serving in Vietnam just had their money sitting on the side. So they would bring these guys back and hand them all their money. Crazy, it wasn't a lot of money, but to them, it might as well have been $1 million. And that's why I think we had some of the problems we had when we did finally leave or go on leave or whatever we were doing. I, quite honestly, never wore my uniform when I wasn't on the base. It was an air station, a Marine Corps air station, so the rules were really lax. And I could grow my hair, not this far, but I could grow it so that I could walk down the street and no one would know I was a Marine. They had non-saluting rules because Air Force Marine pilots were not going to yell at somebody for not saluting if that person was working on their airplane. So I didn't really have a complete military experience. And I had a part-time job loading ships, and I spent my evenings in a barracks with 65, 70 other guys. But other than that, it didn't seem like I was really in the military. And it wasn't until I saw what was happening to a lot of the people who were coming back that it suddenly occurred to me that there was really a war going on. I got to the end of my 2-year draft. They bring you before a person who tries to explain to you what's going to happen if you re-enlist, and this is how much money we're going to give you. When I sat down with that gentleman, he smiled at me and he said, "You don't belong." He says, "You should leave," he says, "because it's not going to be good for you and not good for the Marine Corps when you go." He says, "We have 2 hours here and I'll explain to you how to get your education paid for and this paid for." And he was very good about it. And there was no way I was staying. I got released and sent home. Didn't keep very much of the things I had when in the Marine Corps. The law was that I had to keep a uniform. It's still in the same box it came in, and it's still sitting up on a shelf. And that's pretty much it. And if you have some questions, when I got out, I was already engaged. Had a little trouble. I looked for a job the last month before I got out, and none of the jobs that were offered to me were jobs that paid as much as the job I had working in a supermarket before I went in. And so I went back to the supermarket work. I worked for a company called Jewel Foods, which was a local Chicago supermarket chain that's still around. It was a decent job. I got married. I moved up, just maybe out of just being there. I became a store manager. I became a purchasing agent for shelving for putting up new stores. I designed where the peas were going to be and the apples and laid that out for them. And I did that for a couple of years. And then I went back to being a store manager. By then, the process for store managers had changed drastically. And I spent about 1.5 years working almost 90 hours a week, 7 days a week, as a store manager. Finally, the wife says, "You know, I'm going to more of your family occasions than you are. And maybe you ought to try something else." I was real hesitant because obviously making pretty decent money at the time. Didn't know if I was going to find something. And she said, well, quit, take a month off. Don't do anything. Don't look for a job. Keep it away. And then start looking. So I quit, and I came home the night that I quit. A friend of mine called and said, I'm going to jail, and I have nobody to take care of my 5 drugstores. Would you watch them? And I said, yeah, I'd do that. I can stick around for a couple of years and do that. I did that for almost 2 years. He was in a minimum security prison, which gave him weekends off. I would see him every weekend. He was a good friend. We got along real well. But when he came back full time, there wasn't a place for both of us. It was only 5 stores, and they operated themselves most of the time. So I decided I was going to quit, and he said, work 3 days a week, look for a job 2 days a week. When you find one, walk away, and we're still friends. And so I started to do that, and I wasn't finding anything, and I just decided I was going to quit and full-time look for a job. One of the people who sold to us in the drugstore came in and said, I really need a salesman. And I said, well, good luck. I'm not chasing people to sell them socks and underwear. And he said, no, just come to the meeting, and if you don't like it, get up and walk out, and we're good. And 3 days later, I was working for him. 3-4 years later, a gentleman from Oklahoma came to buy pantyhose from me. I sold him some pantyhose. He went and talked to the owner of the store, the company, and then 2 hours later, he came back and said, on Friday, I'm going to own the company. You're the only employee that's staying. Have a nice day. Don't say anything, just stay out of the way. They were based in Oklahoma, and I was in Chicago. And basically, I was a supervisor. I hired all new people, and I supervised them. I became a regional vice president, which was from central Canada down to Florida, and from Minnesota into the Bahamas. And all I would do is travel around, and there was about 25 guys in that area that did the actual work. And I just rode them. They sold to another company. It wasn't going to work. They had a totally different philosophy on how they treated employees. So I quit. I looked for a job for a year. And then I was about middle to upper 50s. And I had seriously considered retiring, just not working anymore, until I found out what my insurance bill was going to be every month. And I thought, well, I have to find a job that has insurance. I don't care about pay. I didn't care about anything, to tell you the truth, as long as I could get insurance. I had a friend who worked for Walgreens who said, geez, John, you're a little old to come in as a store manager, but we'll hire you as an assistant manager, and you can to serve out your time there. And I said, well, I'm still looking, but at the end of the year, if I don't have something, I'll call you. Well, I called her, and the beginning of that next year, I was an assistant manager for Walgreens. It was only supposed to be until I got to 62. I finally left when I was 70. Still at the same position, mostly at the same store, but it was fun. It was enjoyable. Along about 68, my wife got sick. She had a terrible time getting around during the winter with snow and all of that other thing. So we started looking for a place to retire. We looked in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. I'd already worked in Florida and knew that was not the place for us to be. I wasn't crazy about Texas. So finally we decided on, we bought a place, or almost bought a place in Tennessee, right in back of Dollywood. It burnt down a week before we were supposed to close on it. So we came here and we looked in Charleston and Mount Pleasant. And as far as I was concerned, that place is a disaster. I mean, it's too busy. There's too many cars. The getting around during the spring and during hurricanes was a disaster. So we tried North Charleston. Again, we weren't comfortable. Spent a weekend in Georgetown, and a week later we bought a house here. That's where I've been ever since. When I left the military, I absolutely divorced myself from anything that was military. I wasn't very good at being a Marine. I didn't agree with a lot of the policies, not necessarily military policies, but stuff that was kind of shoved on them. I just wanted to be as far away from it as possible. And the only thing that kind of stuck with me was, John, you should get an education. John, it's free. It's right there. All you got to do is sign the card. And I was fortunate that I got to go to a place that catered to people like me, 23-year-olds that maybe had some college, but not a lot. Most of us were married, and Northern Illinois was absolutely that place. In fact, I probably recommended to 30 or 40 other veterans, if you really want to go to school, drive over to Northern, because they set a schedule for veterans. I only wanted to go to school 2 days a week. I only went to school 2 days a week. And they made sure I had all of the classes in those 2 days. They were really great. Had a lot of fortunate breaks. Learned a lot in the military. Sometimes I still don't agree with some of their policies, but everywhere you go, there's policies you can't agree with. Mom was really upset. My mom had 3 boys in 3 years. The oldest one went 18 months before I did, and he spent all of his time in Vietnam. I was drafted and sent out to the West Coast, and 18 months later, my younger brother was drafted, and he was sent to Europe. She was not a happy person about it. We each had either a girlfriend or a fiance, and they would have weekly meetings to share information that we may have passed. I was never good at letter writing. But the 3 young girls helped them cope. When my brother came back from Vietnam, he was a very different person. After 3 years of being back, he walked out, just left. Left 3 kids, a wife, and I didn't see him for about 15 years. And then I looked him up to tell him that, his dad was dying. We had some communication after that, but not a lot. He never really recovered. My younger brother came back, got married, had a decent job, but he got cancer and chose not to treat it. So he died at a reasonably young age. He was just short of 50. I have a sister and another brother. I have a sister who is 9 years younger than I am, and I have a brother that's 15 years younger than I am. He was born just before I went into the service. Sister lives on the West Coast. I see her every once in a while. My brother still lives in Chicago. But that's pretty much it. My dad really never had anything to say about it. He served during World War II. Again, he never left the States. He was a dental assistant in the Army. When he got out, he says, I don't need to look in anybody's mouth ever again. So he handled it better than Mom did. But she was pretty upset about it. I think during the Vietnam War, there was a lot of people like me who had no military history. As far as I can tell you, my grandmother came over on a boat from Poland when she was 12. She got married on the dock and then walked through as an American citizen, married to an American citizen. She never saw that person again. And she was a migrant farm worker in Michigan and Illinois and Indiana. So I have no clue who my grandfather is. And so therefore, there's no military history. I can't tell you what my relatives did. And I had no interest in the military going in, and kind of at the end got soured on how it was handled. And I just walked away. I didn't even consider joining an organization like this till I got here to Georgetown. Mm-hmm. And I ran into Jerry, and Jerry's a very enthusiastic person who is very good at bringing people in mm-hmm. without trying. And unfortunately, there was a lot of people at that time like me who had no affiliation with the military, just got drafted. All of a sudden, they were in a place that's 100 degrees, and it wasn't fun. And they came back with that attitude. And that scared me for a very long time. You would see them on television in Washington, D.C., acting a little goofy and caring. Well, I understood why they were. But for the average person, they have no idea what was going through those people's minds for 13, 14 months.